Cinematic adaptations of true events have become commonplace in cinema, from war movies to lighthearted comedies. Tales of survival to historical diaries, there's something more humbling and personal to stories of which we can identify. Over the years, there's been many outstanding pictures to retell actual events, often taking liberties for dramatic effect. One of the most notable genres to take advantage is horror. The use of genuine accounts has become one of the most effective tools in alternate cinema, whether it be a basic slasher or a complex psychological dark thriller. Because the truth is that nothing is as scary as reality. So join me as I count down the top 10 movies based on real events. For this list, I'll be looking at the most impressive dark pictures that were inspired by real events. Authenticity will not be a factor, but judged on the movies they spawned. I'll also be overlooking the movies that depict the horror of war, as that's a list for another time. So let's begin. Number 10. During the late 1980s and early 90s, Australian serial killer Ivan Milat made international news as the Backpack Murderer. Released in 2005, Wolf Creek is the dramatization of the actual event. Also taking notes from the killer Bradley Murdoch, who's currently serving a life sentence for similar murders. The movie follows three stranded hikers who run into Mick Taylor, a twisted outback yokel who is the amalgamation of Milat and Murdoch. Noted in cinema history as one of the pictures to create the torture porn subgenre, the abhorrent events depicted would earn the movie mass notoriety. Atypical to Australian productions, the movie would further the reported brutality and deliver one of the most viscerally disturbing pictures of the 21st century. Number 9. The case of Sylvia Likens has become infamous in American history. A girl who was imprisoned, tortured, abused, and ultimately murdered by her own guardian would make national headlines in 1965. Taking liberties to adapt the account to screen, The Girl Next Door follows the perspective of a friend who bared witness and was forced to participate in the harrowing tribulations of Meg, the cinematic representation of Likens. Adapted to screen by Jack Ketchum, the original case would contribute to the creation of the American Child Protection Agency, and despite the events also being covered in An American Crime, The Girl Next Door is one of the most hard-hitting and heartbreaking movies of the reality genre. Number 8. The concept of a malevolent sentient home had often been seen in Hollywood. Released in 1979, the retelling of an actual account would create one of the most iconic movies of the decade, the Amityville Horror. The most unnerving fact of the homicide was the lack of reaction from other family members following gunfire, assuming many to believe that it was the house that allowed them to be executed. The movie follows the Lutz family, named after the inhabitants following the incident, who reported supernatural happenings within the building. Although heavily dramatized for the picture, the Amityville Horror is still recognized as one of the most terrifying experiences in cinema. Number 7. As one of the more difficult to believe reality-based horror movies, the premise for The Hills Have Eyes was taken from a 16th century cannibalistic clan headed by the infamous Sawney Bean. Active on the shores of Scotland, Bean was reported to have fathered an inbred family of 45 children and grandchildren, many of which were born of kidnapped women, homing his family within the cliffside of the caves of Ben Ain Head. The Beans were speculated to have consumed several hundred victims prior to their capture. Directed by master of horror Wes Craven and adapted to a modern setting by using radioactive fallout to make the family appear more grotesque, the reality behind The Hills Have Eyes remains one of the most disturbing chapters in British history. Number 6. Tales of alien abduction are no stranger in American folklore. In the case of Travis Walton, it would prove to be one of the most unsettling accounts in American history. Penned by the actual reported abductee, Fire in the Sky retells the account of a lumberjack who disappeared for 5 days in 1975. Witnessed by 5 of his co-workers, the movie explores the mystery surrounding Walton's disappearance, which ultimately leads to the legendary abduction sequence. Starring Daniel Sweeney and Robert Patrick, the extraordinary backwoods story has since become mandatory viewing for both sci-fi and horror fans. And although the report's account is being picked apart by skeptics, as a movie, Fire in the Sky is one of the most unnerving pictures of the 1990s. Number 5. Professing to over 100 murders, including that of his own mother, Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, is the dramatization of nomadic murderer Henry Lee Lucas. Written and directed by John McNaughton, who was taken by Lucas's lack of remorse or emotion, would base the story on Henry teaching his former cellmate to be a protege killer. Based on Otis Toole, another genuine nomadic serial killer, the movie took very few liberties with the reported source material and was subsequently banned in several countries. Over time, Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, managed to find an audience and is now recognized as one of the greatest dark thrillers in all of alternate cinema. Number 4. Despite the fantasy element of Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street, the inspiration was taken from several real-world mysteries, most notably 2 fatal conditions, sudden unexplained death syndrome and Brugada syndrome, both resulting in death during sleep. Fascinated with the concept, Craven was inspired to create a physical representation of the illness, basing the character on a disturbing stranger he witnessed in his childhood and named after his junior school bully. Freddy Krueger was created. Adapting the story to suit the horror style of the era, A Nightmare on Elm Street spawned one of the most recognized and original franchises in all of cinema, and also created one of the greatest pop culture icons, not only in horror, but also of the 1980s. Number 3. In August of 1990, there was a media frenzy surrounding Danny Rawling, aka the Gainesville Ripper, a serial killer who murdered 5 students over 4 days with his ultimate goal to become a superstar of murder. The case was closely followed by screenwriter Kevin Williamson, who in response wrote a script entitled Scary Movie. Peppering the story with references to the movies that inspired him as a writer, Scream would be the final product. Released in the Christmas of 1996 and directed by fellow reality enthusiast Wes Craven, the movie first opened to mediocre reception, which over time became one of the biggest movies of the following year, to which many now believe Scream to be the ultimate slasher. Number 2. Often considered to be an adaptation of The Possession of Anneliese Michel, the true genesis of The Exorcist is taken from the case of Robbie Mannheim, a boy of 12 who made headlines in 1949 for being reportedly taken over by a demon. Hearing of the event as a student, writer William Peter Blatty created a story of Reagan, a possessed 12-year-old girl, and fathers Baron and Karras, 2 priests who take holy battle with the demon within. In the years since, there's been much acrimony over the authenticity of the account, to which some see as nothing more than exaggerated hearsay, but there's no denying that The Exorcist is one of the most culturally important movies in the history of horror. If you enjoyed Demented Top 10s, show your appreciation by hitting the thumbs up button, and be sure to subscribe to keep up with the channel. Also, have you seen future Top 10s or follow Demented Pictures on Facebook, or consider supporting the show on Patreon, links in the description box below. Number 1. A name well known in the alternate community, Ed Gein, also known as the Butcher of Plainfield, is considered the genesis of modern horror. Shocking the world in 1957, when it was discovered that the unassuming man had not only murdered, but also accessorized dozens of cadavers into furniture and clothing. His actions would lead to 3 of the most prominent horror features of the 20th century. Taking Gein's obsession with his mother and keeping her corpse at home led to the creation of Norman Bates from Robert Bloch's Psycho. his craft for accessorizing human body parts would furnish the Sawyer household in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And also, the discovery of a female bodysuit stitched together from the flesh of his victims and other cadavers would be directly referenced in the Academy Award-winning Silence of the Lambs. Arguably the most influential individual in modern horror, Ed Gein's crimes and psychosis would become the building block for the future of alternate cinema. So there was my list. Were there any I missed? Which movies based on true events do you love the most? Leave a comment below and be sure to check out some other top 10s on screen now. And remember, no list is definitive but the one you make yourself. This is Mike from Demented Pictures saying, may your movies be bloody and your scares be shitless.